What's the quickest you've noped out of a job? It was a shop that refurbished train suspension hydraulics. 40% of the guys were missing at least part of a finger. Maintenance guy was missing 4 on one hand and 5 on another. Half the guys were high and the guy training me stormed out halfway through the second day. I was like, yeah, I'm just going to dip out now. How was work? Great. I even have a nickname. 10 Fingers. The old 10 Fingers wasn't using it anymore. Walked into a group interview as a young moron. The second I heard the word vector marketing I bounced. Sounds like you weren't that moronic if you bounced. I'm the real moron. I got sucked into one of those running presentations for selling vitamins when I was like 16 for a couple months. I had first applied to make cheese sticks at a local hoagie place, which I really wanted, but after not hearing back for a couple weeks I went onto the vitamin thing. The kicker is, after not being paid anything for about a dozen shameful vitamin demos I called the hoagie place back. They told me they misplaced my application and could not find it. After deciding they had wanted me on board, ditched that vitamin gig immediately and went blissfully into the world of cheese stick cooking for the next few years of high school. By the end of it, I was even dubbed grill master. Many years ago I worked at a popular sports bar as a line cook. First day they had me train with a guy who didn't speak English for 2 hours. Not a huge deal. Mostly you observe people in a kitchen and that's how you learn. Owner came back and said she was scheduling me to be alone the next day, which was Super Bowl Sunday. Noped out of there so fast. Left right then and there. You're the new guy. Nope. I'm the last guy. Apostrophe. I worked for a newspaper for most of a week. I was expected to use my own laptop and software. No it and I'd have to share logins and passwords with 3 other people, and guess when they would need them? 1 week. It was 1985, and a collections agency was looking for an IT guy. It was basically desktop support on some IBM PCs. It took me a week to realize what a sold editing place that was and I bolted. It was mutual. Actually, they saw how I was reacting to some of the techniques the collectors used. The targets were mostly old people who were encouraged to sell family heirlooms and the like to pay off debts. I'm tired. Kept reading that as ICBMs. The targets were mostly old people who were encouraged to sell family heirlooms and the like to pay off debts. Loan sharking with WMDs. 3 days after my 2-week training, I was supposed to be a seasonal temp worker for a national propane company. The job distribution and training consisted of taking calls off hours for people who wanted refills and acting as a messenger service, referring their contact info their local store when they opened the next day. Easy peasy. When I got out onto the floor, I found I was actually expected to be a dispatcher for drivers and also first point of contact for all emergency situations. Things I had never been so much as briefed on in training. My first shift I had to field a call from a local police officer who was on site to a horrific propane truck crash. I got to wake the guy's district manager in the dead of night, tell him his worker was dead, and the overturned truck was blocking a few lines of the freeway and the police were trying to get a hold of him. That was just the start. A customer got the smell of garlic and eggs in the house. I got the call. What do I do next? Miss Dispatcher? Fuck if I know. Get out of the house as soon as possible. Code detector is going off. I got the call. Instead of 911 for some reason, I had zero interest in being a underpaid, not trained emergency dispatcher. It's the only job I took off on without giving a 2-week notice. I was nice enough to finish out my shift on the 3rd day, but that was it. So you weren't hired to sell propane and propane accessories? Haha. Yes I was. Only, I ended up as poor man's 911 operator. I went into an office for an interview. They said they had several positions available, and I wanted to do some admin stuff. Welp. After the interview they told me to get in a van to do the next part of the process. Turns out we drove an hour away so I could shadow one of their door-to-door salespeople. They would ask residents to go into their basement to check their hot water heaters to see if they were eligible to replace them with their company's own. I felt pretty uncomfortable about this and pretty pissed my whole day was gone doing this. The worst part was the girl I was shadowing spent half the day sitting around in the truck reading magazines and waiting for people to come home from work. I was sort of asking questions about the job and she got defensive and said, "Well, I decide if you get this job or not." To which I replied, "Yeah, right, don't know if I want to do this." But she kept insisting that it was her who decided if I worked. Don't think she understood I meant that I didn't want to do this shit. Fucking waste of a day. Found out that the educational assistance they touted in their advertisement applied only to full-time employees, and that they both defined full-time as no fewer than 40 hours, and kept anyone who would apply for that assistance from ever being qualified for it. None of this was advertised, and the people I interviewed with assured me, a college student, that working 21 hours a week would get me the benefits. Too bad I read my contract before signing it and called them out. Don't fucking lie to your employees, especially during an interview on something that can be easily and swiftly disproven. If you're willing to lie to me about this, what else are you willing to lie to me about? I did their training before being offered my contract, so I count it as having worked there. BTW. I worked a part-time job with tuition assistance. They stated that you would receive it if you were there for a certain amount of time, I think 6 months or a year, and were never late. During my second week there, the manager called and asked where I was. I said at home. She said that I was scheduled to be at work right now. I had written down my schedule and really didn't think I was supposed to work that day, but I rushed and went in. Later I was talking with a coworker and told her about it. She said that had happened to her and a bunch of other people. The schedule was just written in pencil. So I'm pretty sure they were writing people in after they got their schedule from the wall, so they didn't have to pay anyone tuition assistance. Mine had to be when I was 18 and working at Blockbuster. I was helping the manager during the before open shift getting new items stocked on the shelves that came in that morning. My mom called me and told me that my dad was having a heart attack and she was panicking while waiting for the ambulance. Why did she call me at work to tell me this? The Blockbuster I worked at was in a strip mall type area behind my cul-de-sac. My house and the Blockbuster was separated by a small alley and a 3-minute walk. I told my manager what was happening and asked if I could leave to help my mom while they waited for the ambulance. She said no. I just stood there looking at her thinking she couldn't be serious. I would be gone for all of 10 minutes and back helping her if needed. She stressed how important it was to get the things done that needed to be done, and I could only leave if I called around to the other workers and found someone to come in and cover for me while I was gone. I took off my name tag, slammed it on the counter and walked out. I never went back for any reason. For any who might wonder, my dad came out fine, was in the hospital for a few days. Many years ago I was managing a fast food restaurant for a local franchise. Shortly before lunch, one of my employees got a phone call that their grandmother had been taken to the hospital with a possible heart attack. They lived with their grandmother. From what I understood, their parents were not in the picture. I told him to go to the hospital and I would find coverage. About 15 minutes later my district manager showed up and asked why I was short-handed. Fast food restaurants run on razor-thin margins, so one missing body is easily noticed. I told him what happened and that employee was on his way to the hospital. His response was, "What is he going to do? Save her? He's not a doctor. We have a business to run." That was the last straw for me with that company. It was part of a larger pattern of that attitude, and I refused to treat employees like that. I gave my notice shortly after and moved to a better job. I was interviewing for a contract position at a very small game development company, and they told me they were looking for someone to help finish up an existing project. Literally, the game looked like it was made in manuscript paint, as if they had just hired some random guy off the street and asked them to make some art for them. Granted, it's a mobile game and sold for the standard $0.99, so maybe that's not the worst. But the game itself doesn't look engaging at all either. But I figure, worst comes to worst, I could make some money on the side with some low effort work. Then they told me that my pay would be a percentage of the sales. Noped right out of that one. I went for a trial shift with a door-to-door sales company. The guy I was partnered up with told me that if he didn't make above the target sales he was coming out with the equivalent of £3 per hour, which in the UK is well below minimum wage. This was commission only self-employed role. Noped all the way home that day. I did exactly the same thing. Travelled all the way to Manchester for the trial day. Spent 4 hours wandering around people's houses knocking on their doors trying to sell them stuff I didn't care about, and then went home. Never again. Worked in a bakery. It was my first day, so I get there in the morning to meet everyone. Then they have me grease up baking trays for the others to fill. I lift up the first tray, and like 10 to 15 cockroaches just scatter everywhere from under the tray. I tell the guy showing me the work that there were cockroaches and he just shrugged. This was all in the back store. Customers were about 10 feet away. So I tell the guy that I'm not feeling too well after about an hour of doing that, and I head to the bathroom. When I came out I told him I couldn't do that job, and he told me to get a real job then. So I left and got myself a proper job. Did you report them for that? Please tell me you reported their insanely unclean facility. I didn't at the time, but I did tell my mom who had sort of found the job for me, and she didn't believe me and thought I was making it a bigger deal than it was. Turns out a month later an inspector closed the place down because of how nasty it was. I had an interview at what I thought was a regular steakhouse in a new town I had just moved to. The interview went well. It was just before the restaurant opened, so it was pretty empty. At the end, a waitress starting her shift walked by in assless chaps and a thong. Turns out that was their uniform. The manager called like 30 minutes later saying I got the job. I had to politely decline that one. Technically, all chaps are assless. Otherwise they are just pants. Very true lol. I don't know why I've heard that phrase so many times, because you're totally right, they are all assless, haha. Back in college, I used to work part-time as a nanny. One summer I landed a really sweet sounding 40-hour/week, Monday Friday, nannying job, looking after a baby and toddler. I was super excited about all the money I was going to make working that many hours. But the weird thing about this job was that the unemployed dad was also going to be at home with me. He was supposed to be spending all his time looking for a job, and I was watching after the kids while the wife was at work. Literally that first week, on day 2 or 3, he starts hinting about his marriage problems and how his wife sleeps on the couch. The next day, he asks me to try out his fancy new massage chair. I reluctantly agreed, and he just stared at me while I laid on this vibrating chair and was like, "Oh yeah, nice, great, thanks." He then offered to give me an actual massage sometime, and maybe I wouldn't mind giving him one too. On Friday afternoon I went home, told me parents, who I was living with for the summer, everything, and my mom called the guy and told him I wasn't coming back the following Monday or ever. He then sent me a text saying he was disappointed in me, and his poor wife. 2 different ones. First was a scheme going door to door soliciting donations for the environment. You had to get 5 donations or something to get paid. I worked one 4-hour training shift, then left. Second was door to door dollar item sales. After an hour, I realized it was MLM and told them no. But since I was in their van, I had to stay the whole 8 hours. It was my first day working for a family business that had just bought the equipment necessary to install underground fiber optic lines. They had previously been realtors, but had read an article in an entrepreneur's magazine that said $1 mill/e-gross was common. They pulled their 14 and 17 years old out of school to act as laborers, and the mom and dad were going to run separate crews. I was their first employee hire. As I was setting up my bore path, the mom told me we didn't need to expose an electrical line. We would just drill a few feet underneath it, and we didn't need to expose it. I told her that was ridiculous, reckless and dangerous. The husband then came over and wanted to fight me for insulting his wife, and not 30 seconds into his tirade the 14 and 17 years old drilled directly into a large electrical line, which pops the transformer and sounds like an explosion. As I was walking away, the father went from wanting to fight me to chasing his 17 years old around a retention pond. The mom was begging me not to leave. Nope. Graphic design from home job. Mailed the interview. Had absolute confidence I could provide this dude what he was asking for. Got the job. And the first thing he said was to take a rather large check that would be mailed to me and buy my equipment. It was supposed to be from a special vendor that was to engrave the laptop and provide software. It was a scam. I looked up his business on Google rather than through the link he sent me. I found the exact same shitty website with dozens of different CEOs. Told him to not send me a check and that I was not longer interested. The check was going to be fake, and the money I would be sending to the vendor would end up being my own once the bank found out. This quarter you guys have really achieved a lot for the company and surpassed our expectations. Just a reminder, we will be having to lay some more people off soon. Peace out. I'll find something else before you make me leave. I had a job that had the audacity to hold a town hall meeting to tell us how well the company that did the past year, and then announce at the end that wages will be frozen until further notice. It was a few weeks before we normally got the news of our regularly scheduled yearly raises. Happens all the time. In a bank I had worked with in the past, the CEO sent out a grand email on how profits were up 25% and how the future looks bright. A month later, my manager tells me that we didn't too well, ergo salaries would be frozen for a year at least. WTF bro? I was unemployed for a couple months and started applying for pretty much any job I could do. This one was a basic small business support contractor. The employee the interviewer introduced to me mouthed "run" when he turned his back. Happened to me at an oxygen bar at Universal Studios. Cold calling people about injury claims. Have you been injured in the past 3 years? That kind of thing. The thing that really irked me was that all of the people I called in those 20 minutes were polite, said they're not interested, and they were just sitting down for dinner. I realized it was a horrible job, and I was in no way cut out for it. I left after 20 minutes and just walked out the door without a word. I've had one tell me I was in a car accident in the last 2 years. All I could say was damn. No one told me. I went to my orientation at a boot factory. They're government contracted and so pay minimum wage. So I figured I'd work there a while and look for something better. After we do the usual paperwork signing and such, we are taken as a group onto the factory floor for a tour. It's hot. It's crowded. It stinks. And everyone working looks annoyed by our presence. Okay, I guess not everyone loves their job, right? No biggie. I'm sure this won't be so bad. Then our guide informs us in no uncertain terms that our coworkers quite often give new people bad information to get them in trouble or make them mess up. They'd even be the ones to rat you out. Then we're told that our foreman is the type to yell for no reason, ask people if they're drunk in an accusatory way for no reason, and is generally a giant asshole. I took a few moments to think after these last revelations, said nah, and walked out of the building without a word to anyone. Fuck that shit. Captain, I'm not putting up with all of that for $8 and some change an hour. Second day at Rue 21 and the managers plus other coworkers all went out to lunch together and left me alone in the store. I wasn't able to ring up people yet and the store was packed. I just walked out. When I was 16 I had an interview at a local pizza place in a not so good part of town. I was hired, and as I was walking out 2 guys came in and robbed the place. The manager gave them the money in the register and they ran out. I looked at him and he said you get used to it. I never went back. I like to imagine it was the same 2 guys who robbed it on a weekly basis. And the first time was a joke. But the manager just gave them all the money without complaint, and they've been doing it ever since. It became a friendly tradition of sorts. He still hasn't figured out their identities, but they play racquetball with him on Tuesdays. Ski masks and all. I had a job in a salad plant. Those bags of salad mix a lot of restaurants use. I was there for 2 weeks coring lettuce in front of a conveyor belt. 8 hours a day. Pick up a head. Slam it. Pull the core. Put it down. Next. You talk to your coworkers, or you plot the downfall of Western civilization. One really sweet lady had been there for 10 years. 10 years on the lettuce line. She got called into the office and was gone for about half an hour. She said I won't be here tomorrow. I got promoted. I asked what she'd be doing. Cabbage. I didn't quit. I wished her well, dropped my shit and walked out. I feel bad about not quitting. But I was young and, well, 10 years, that was 28 years ago. Had I stayed I might be up to carrots by now. I sometimes wonder how my life might be different had I stayed. And in those moments I celebrate every decision I've ever made.